Hey everybody, who's your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 15 of Supergirl called Solitude. And this is a fairly nice episode of the series. Definitely lots of little bits and pieces of Superman lore out there for the comic fans, and decent way of moving along the story of the show in general. So let's just kind of get right into things. So let's kind of talk about some of those nice little nods to the comics in general. The whole thing with there being a dwarf star alloy key that opens the Fortress of Solitude. Well, okay, that's lifted directly from All Star Superman. Now, the idea of there being this big old key that basically nobody who isn't Superman can use to enter the Fortress of Solitude, that's a thing from the more whimsical days of the Silver Age of comics. Um, we get to see Kellex again and again in the comics. For a long time, Kellex was the main robot that looked after the Fortress of Solitude and was, Superman's servant. Superman, the Fortress of Solitude again, sort of being very clearly modeled after the ones from the Christopher Reeves movies. Okay, I was never that wild about that particular interpretation of the Fortress of Solitude, but I guess I'm kind of in the minority there. Now, what I absolutely love is they go in there and they see this big statue of a man and a woman holding a globe. Now, what a lot of people probably missed is that that's actually Laura and Jor-El, and they're holding a globe of Krypton. And for a long time in the Superman comics, that being part of the Fortress of Solitude has been a real staple. And it's an idea that I've always loved. I mean, it just really speaks to me because one of the ideas that they've played with in the comics is that the Fortress of Solitude is where Superman will go to explore the Kryptonian side of his heritage. He'll sometimes put on Kryptonian clothes. He'll speak Kryptonian to the robots there. He'll sit around and read various pieces of information about Kryptonian history and culture. And, just as I said, sort of where he goes to get in tune with his Kryptonian side, where he goes to try and understand what it is that he's lost by being here on Earth, to maybe get a little bit of an idea of what his life would have been like had Krypton never exploded. And again, that's an idea I've always really found very fascinating and also very relatable. I mean, I'm somebody who spent 6 years of my life living overseas. I spent 3 years in South Korea and just under 3 years living in Japan. And when you're far away from home and you're in a culture that's very different than your own, the opportunity to go somewhere and be around things that remind you of home is very important. But, that's a very different situation for Superman where, Earth is really all he's ever known. But that I want to get in touch, I want to be able to touch this culture. That is very understandable to me. Um, And of course, in this Fortress of Solitude, we see what's some kind of red lumpy thing off on a little pillar. It's not really called attention to. Can't help but wonder what that is. I mean, it probably is not red kryptonite. Kara would have probably had some sort of a reaction to that. But the real kicker is we see the Legion flight ring. Now, in the more modern retellings of Superman's origin, when he was a teenager, he was pulled into the future and got to have these cool adventures with the Legion of Superheroes. And in the comics, similar things have happened to Supergirl. In fact, her most common character she's most commonly linked with romantically in the comics is Brainiac 5 from the Legion of Superheroes, who, despite having the name Brainiac in his name, is actually a hero. Although, yeah, and that was, I think, kind of a part of a plot point from the Legion of Superheroes cartoon from several years back, but I never really watched that, so I don't really have much I can add on that. And of course, this episode, our big villain is Brainiac 8, aka Indigo. Now, this is a character from the comics. She was introduced, was part of a big Young Justice Teens Titans crossover, but ultimately kind of really came to the forefront as a character during Judd Winnick's run on Outsiders. And I don't want to spoil too much from there, but there she was. I found her to be a very interesting character, although there kind of threw a plot twist in there regarding her that uh, people either kind of loved or hated. I personally liked it quite a bit, but that didn't go over very well with everyone. Here on the show, she is portrayed just kind of as a straight up villain. Now, what's interesting is she's very much of the whole thing with, like, let's kill all the humans, while whatever Myriad is seems to have at least spared the human race, although probably putting them in a position of being subservient to Kryptonians. So, whatever Non is up to, he at least doesn't want to commit complete and utter genocide against the human race. And even he doesn't really seem to want to have anything to do with Indigo. Um, Now, her and obviously kind of having the hots for him, that's interesting. Kind of one of the interesting plot points of the Outsiders run was Indigo's relationship with a heroic character. And again, I don't. I mean, this is comics that have been old and done with, but I don't really want to spoil anything for it because they did come up with some cool plot twists. So if anybody wants to go and like read about this character, I don't want to spoil it for them. Uh, but yeah, let's see what we got. Um, of course, she here Indigo is played by Laura Vandervoot, who's best known for having played Kara on Smallville some years back. And it's just one of those things where it's been said that people who get involved in the various in the Superman franchise, do have a tendency to want to come back and be a part of that again in future Superman related projects. The guy who played Jimmy Olsen on like the 1950s Superman show in the more recent one of the more recent Superman films, he actually appeared briefly as a bartender, for example. And of course, Christopher Reeve guest starred several couple of times on Smallville, and we've got Dean Cain here on the show as well. So, man, if they could somehow work in Tim Daly, how awesome would that be? So let's see. Um, Now this incarnation of Indigo, it's powers-wise somewhat different than the comics, but it's nothing that I can't roll with. And I love that she talked about the planet Kalu and the people there, the Brainiac clan. Uh, you have to mention that she did say that she's Brainiac 8, and Brainiac is one of Superman's primary adversaries. And we've already talked about Brainiac 5. Comics, of course, there's Brainiac 2, Vril Dox, very important guy in the old Rebels comics. Yeah, so Brainiac, kind of a big deal. We also get this really nice twist of explaining, like, how in the world Kara's pod was able to haul Fort Ross out of the Phantom Zone. Well, given that would have been kind of like a golf cart pulling an oil tanker, that's one of those things that never really made sense. And I've complained about that before, but here we get an explanation as to what's going on. It's just like, ah, okay. Now, it's a shame that they couldn't have played a little bit more with Kara's reaction to Indigo's, like, yeah, if it wasn't for me, you'd still be floating that pod out in space. That sort of seems like something that she should have maybe had a little bit more of a reaction to. But, the show's only 44 minutes. And I do like how they don't undersell Indigo. They make it quite clear, and justifiably so, that she was the most dangerous person locked up in Fort Ross. And this episode gives us plenty of reason to believe that. What's a little less believable is why she's so obsessed with destroying National City. I mean, I guess it's like, oh, Supergirl's there. I hate Supergirl because her aunt threw me in prison, so I'm going to destroy the city. I'm going to use this missile from an unhackable military installation. Um, why didn't you just hack a hackable military installation and use those nuclear missiles? And why would you only fire one nuclear missile? I mean, at the end of the day, this is really, really stupid. And it's a little bit vague. I mean, like, okay, I guess she nukes National City, and I guess that's supposed to trigger worldwide nuclear war, and that's what destroys the human race. I mean, okay. I mean, that does not seem unreasonable, but sort of like, okay, can you maybe expand on this master plan of yours a little bit? And you know, I don't think Non one really wants the planet nuked. I mean, the Kryptonians will probably be okay, but nuked planet versus not nuked planet, not a hard call. So yeah, let's see. What else do we have to talk about? Cat Grant continues to be the one of the worst bosses in history, even going so far as to taunt Win about his dad. I mean, can you imagine if somebody had at your job, like they had a parent who like would say like, killed somebody in a like in an armed robbery or something, and the boss calls him like, "Hey, murderer's kid." Win's dad is a murderer. It's like, oh my god, I'm so suing you for creating a hostile work environment. And speaking of the work environment at CatCo, Jimmy, if you want to keep it under your hat that you're working with Supergirl, stop having conversations with her into your wrist in the middle of a crowded office. And Siobhan, if you want to keep your relationship with Win a secret, don't make out with him in front of the elevators near the office where dozens of people work. Is everybody on this show really, really stupid about keeping secrets? And never mind this whole obvious BS line that the media gets fed about the missile. It's just like, no, I'm pretty sure there would have been like about 1 million people pointing cameras at something like that. I mean, remember that big thing when there was like the meteorite that exploded over Russia and people were just like, all these cameras and stuff had recordings of it. It's like, yeah, all right, whatever. Now, the other big thing that we have going on in this episode is just the continued tension between Kara and Hank because, she believes that he's the one that killed Astra. And what's interesting is that, Kara goes on like, I really had this chance to bring Astra back to the light, and John robbed us both of that. Kind of overlooking the fact, well, okay, in all fairness, she didn't know at the time that Astra was actually right about to kill John. Now, granted, so she's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to give you an honorable warrior's death." That still doesn't change the fact that you were going to kill this guy. So, yeah. Now, I like how this is not something that got dragged her out for a really long time. It's been a couple of episodes. We've had the time to let things build, and then when the truth comes out, it does so at a suitably dramatic moment that leads to some really nice character stuff for Alex and John and Kara, and it works really well. It's like, okay, you let this simmer for a while, and then it paid off, and, stronger together. I like that this show is not dragging things out. It isn't stringing me along. It lets things go for a while, and then pays it off, and then sets other things up. I mean, that's some good writing there. And let's see. The whole Siobhan Win thing. I don't know. This just sort of feels like, okay, where Win kind of points out like, hey, I have a little bit of an idea of what you're going through. That works. Siobhan deciding suddenly that she wants to make out with Win because of this, that seems BS. And you have to wonder, well, is this just going to be more of Kara when the whole fallout from what happened with Lucy and Jimmy hits her? Is her going to be taking another look at Win and go like, wait, you're with her? She's a horrible person. I don't know. This just kind of feels like early Buffy the Vampire Slayer all over again. Not that that's a bad thing. The high school seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer were, in my book, the better ones. But so yeah, then there's the whole thing with Jimmy and Lucy, and finally Lucy starts to feel like a real character, like somebody I care about. Her former military context, those make sense, something that she could draw upon, and well, the soap opera of it all, contrived as it all is, it does work. that whole thing of I particularly love the whole thing of Kara goes in there to try and sort of fix things up with between Lucy and Jimmy, and she ends up not only making things worse, but ultimately spilling the detail that this becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. The whole thing with his dad and the camera. And I really did like that. Oh, Jimmy finally gets Kara's permission to bring Lucy in on things, and then, in the cruelest way possible, this is when Lucy springs the, "Yeah, we're over. I can tell this isn't going to work between us." So again, it's just it's the soap opera stuff, man. You know, Sometimes it can feel a little overdone, but sometimes that really is like the best stuff in comic books. I remember one time I was reading this collection of old Spider-Man stories from the 70s, and I was genuinely much more interested in what was going on with Peter's dating life than seeing Spider-Man throw down with Tarantula. And that this is the terminology that people in comics use. They call this sort of thing the soap opera of it all. That's a lot of the times the best stuff. And I've complained before that this soap opera stuff with Lucy and Jimmy before hasn't really been working. Here it finally clicks, and that it helps what's going on, particularly the character of Lucy, tremendously. Now, granted, as I said, also having Lucy be able to contribute something besides what's going on with her and Jimmy to the storyline is also pretty important. Uh, but let's see. Anything else? Anything else? Well, given the end of things, we might not have seen the last of Indigo, which would be pretty cool. Um, we still have no idea what in the world Myriad is, but in any case, this episode, lots of really nice lore for fans of the comics. The soap opera stuff works pretty well. Lots of really great character bits. Lucy finally really stepping up as a character. Just lots of good stuff in this episode. This show continues to be very solid, very entertaining, and I am seriously looking forward to seeing what happens in the rest of the season. So, with that, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and also please join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.